Hey guys, so I'm back with another video. In this video I'm going to be talking about intermittent fasting. As I said in my previous videos, I've tried intermittent fasting for 5 whole months and I've tried it during my body transformation. So if you haven't seen that video, I'm going to pull up a card here so you can go and check that out. In this video I'll be talking about like how the whole experience was like. The goods and the bads. I personally experienced like the stuff I liked and I didn't like about intermittent fasting. I'm also going to be dropping some tips for people who want to try it out. And just like in my other videos, I'm not going to be pulling up like random studies to prove my points. Because as I said, I mean, if you know how to look at those researches, most of the time you can prove any kind of point that you want to make with some random study. So let's begin. So my intermittent fasting experience was quite okay. I haven't had like any issues with it, absolutely nothing at all. But as I said, I mean, I'm experiencing like this kind of stuff and I always do things in moderation. So when I first started doing my intermittent fasting, I started with like 12-hour periods. So what I was doing was 12 hours of fasting, 12 hours of feeding. And then after like a few days when I started feeling comfortable, I bumped it up like 2 hours, my fasting period. So my fasting window moved up to 14 hours and then my feeding windows was for 10 hours, okay? And then eventually I moved it up to 16 hours and 8 hours. And also in the very end, like the last month, I think, I started like implementing 24-hour fasting days on the weekends. So it was good in that way. And I've done intermittent fasting, to be honest, like for the main purpose of creating more caloric deficit without like consuming less food. I mean, if it makes any sense. I mean, I didn't want to lower my calories down to a certain point where I was like, I mean, I'm eating, but, you know, not really, kind of. Instead, I decided to see like, okay, let's try intermittent fasting and create a caloric deficit by having a fasting window and still have like proper meals when I was feeding. So that was the whole point when I did intermittent fasting. So with intermittent fasting, just like I talked about in keto, my quality of sleep was fine, energy levels were fine, overall mood, mental clarity, everything was fine. I mean, I didn't experience like anything extreme to a point where I want to talk about it specifically. So it was just a regular diet, and it gets easier after a certain while because you get used to the feeling and it doesn't feel like a feeling anymore. I mean, once you get like used to being hungry, you don't start, you get to a point where you don't feel hungry anymore. It just feels like a normal state, basically. So this video is going to be a little bit shorter than the other ones because I don't think that there is a lot to talk about when it comes to intermittent fasting. I mean, it's very simple. It's just you restrict yourself from eating on certain periods of time, basically, or certain periods of day. So what I liked about it, you set a goal for yourself, especially during like long periods of dieting. I find it that once you switch like a few things around, it makes it easier to go through with the diet. So intermittent fasting exactly helped me do that. So once I started implementing intermittent fasting, it kind of changed my diet because I was on keto already. And then with the intermittent fasting, it became a little bit more fun. So I like this kind of like play arounds with my diet. And also, this is also one of the reasons why I eventually implemented like 24-hour fasting periods. So the second point that I really liked about intermittent fasting is that it teaches you discipline. So if you're one of those people, you know, who just like to snack or like, you know, eat this and that like all the time, with intermittent fasting, you're not going to be able to do that. So it is great for people who require that kind of a discipline, and it's something that you can teach yourself basically. And the third point is that after you get used to it, it is very easy to keep it up. So for example, when I first started, right, normally like in my daily routine, other than like sleeping, you know, I usually eat like maybe a couple hours before sleeping, and then I eat immediately after I wake up because I always wake up very hungry. So I'm one of those like breakfast people basically. So as soon as I wake up, I literally feel like I'm starving. So with intermittent fasting though, once you get used to that hunger levels, it's very easy to keep up really. Like it was absolutely fine after about like 8 or 9 days, I think, that I moved up to 16 hours of fasting period. And it was really easy, and eventually like implementing 24-hour fasting windows, that was also like really simple. And another good thing about it is that it limits your daily calories in a way that it doesn't feel like you're creating a deficit. That's one of the things I like. Because, especially for men, like you eventually get to a point in your diet, especially if you're doing like a long period, which I've done like 6 months, right? You can only so much lower your calories. So once you get to a point there, you're gonna feel like you're not eating anything, even though you're actually eating something. So, but if you implement like intermittent fasting, I actually find it that it really, really helps. And you can literally create a deficit just by implementing intermittent fasting. Okay? So you still keep the same food basically, but you put in like intermittent fasting. So maybe you skip one meal here and there, and it gives you that caloric deficit that you need to go further on your weight loss journey. So let's talk about the things that I didn't like about intermittent fasting. To be honest, I mean, there is not too much to not like about intermittent fasting. It was fun. The only problem with that is, I mean, it's time restrictive. Let's be honest. I mean, you're setting yourself basically a feeding window. So if you're a social person, then yeah, that's going to affect your social life quite a lot. Other than that, I mean, it's not that bad. I mean, being like time restrictive, I didn't find it too difficult personally, but I believe that most people will find this aspect of it a little bit difficult. So another thing I want to mention is that even though it didn't affect me personally, I think that it might affect a lot of people, especially if you're training. I highly recommend you not to train during your fasting window. And if you're training like during fasting window, or it depends even like what time you're training, you might not be able to fit the whole training thing into your like feeding schedule. So that might be one of the things that people might find difficult, I think. The whole thing with the schedule, basically, it might not fit with your schedule properly, especially if you're training. So now let's talk about the tips that I would give to people who want to try out intermittent fasting. First of all, approach it with moderation. Do not start just because you have these like stupid apps. Don't start with what the app tells you, okay? So start with a moderate pace so that you will be able to keep it up. Because the whole point of like doing something is to actually accomplish whatever your goal is. So don't set yourself up for disaster. I mean, why not just do it in moderation, right? So even though I have a very strong will, when I started doing intermittent fasting, I started doing 12 hours. I felt comfortable with it. So, and after that, I moved it up to 14 hours and 10 hours. And then I moved it up to 16 hours and 8 hours. And then eventually I got like 24-hour intermittent fasting periods in 1 week. My second tip would be to hydrate yourself all the time. Soft drinks like, coffee or black tea, I find them to be very useful while you're, like fasting. It kind of keeps you like full. So, of course, try it out. I mean, it might or may not help you, but this is one of the recommendations that I would give to people who want to try intermittent fasting. Also, another thing is that make sure that your last meal on your feeding window is a fat-heavy meal. Okay, it's gonna help with your satiety, so don't go eating like weird things. That's gonna make you feel hungry again after like an hour or two. So make sure to eat like whole foods, and also make sure to eat like healthy fats during your feeding window, especially in your last meal. Okay, so that's gonna help it easier to go through that fasting window. So another tip that I would give to people is that do not train fasted in a fasted state. Okay, so what I would do is that I'm a morning person. I told you before in my videos. I wake up at 5:30 a.m. in the morning. I usually have my breakfast by 6 a.m. in the morning, and then I go to train usually by like 7 a.m. Okay, so I train after my first meal. Of course, I mean it depends on, you know, you can do it after your second meal, third meal. It doesn't matter. As long as you still have some, like, you know, food coming in before you go to train. So I strongly suggest that you train after you have some food. And my final tip, schedule your fast and feeding windows based on your own life, okay? Based on you, based on your own life, your own schedule. Do not go just because you read something on the internet that people skip breakfast and all that kind of nonsense, okay? So, first of all, I personally like to have breakfast no matter what. So when I was doing like 16 to 8 hour window, as I said, I would wake up at 5:30 a.m. I would eat my first meal at 6 a.m. So 2 p.m. was the end of my feeding window, and that was it. So do not go just because you read something on the internet, people, because I find it that a lot of people like to do this, like by skipping breakfast. I mean, if they feel comfortable with it, that is fine. If it fits their own life, their schedule or whatever, that's also completely fine. But just because someone did it and you read it on the internet doesn't mean that it has to be done that exact way, okay? So don't think about it too much, don't overthink basically, and just go with what suits you the best, so it will be a lot easier. And enjoy your weight loss basically. Approach it, hydrate